Let's start this morning with the Prime Minister. Shall I play you a couple of clips of Tories old and new? We've got Anne Widdecombe, the ghost of Tories past, and we've got Brendan Double-Barrel, who is the ghost of Tories present, both essentially circling the same sewer when it comes to the cost of living crisis. Shall we do Widdecombe first? Do you remember the law of Widdecombe? I used to say to you that if you didn't know what to think about a given subject, try to find out what Anne Widdecombe thinks about it and do the exact opposite. I think that still stands, although thankfully she's rarely seen out in public anymore. I don't know why some television producers decided to book her yesterday, but she clearly hasn't mellowed in her old age. Here she is, in danger perhaps of choking on the milk of human kindness.
What do you say to consumers who literally can't afford to pay even for some of the basics if they've gone up the way that cheese sandwich has with all its ingredients?
Well, then you don't do the cheese sandwich.
We're talking about basics. We're talking about absolute basics and staples. We're talking about own brand pasta. You're talking about bread. You're talking about families who cannot afford to feed their children. There's a story today about mothers who can't afford formula milk, so their babies are literally starving at the moment. And so the government
we've been through this before.
So the government shouldn't be doing anything.
Because we've been years
you would
now,
let the children go
because
hungry.
We've been decades without inflation. We've come to regard it as some sort of given right.
Which is should the poorest and most vulnerable be helped out more?
Well, the vulnerable are being helped out.
But especially on the idea of food.
I mean, they are being helped.
Anne Widdecombe there. There aren't any words, really, are there, at a time like this? You can't afford a cheese sandwich. Well, don't eat a cheese sandwich then. I think she calls herself a Christian, doesn't she? I don't know whether Brendan Clark-Smith practices any religion at all. He is the MP for Bassett Law, and he was on Ian Dale's programme. Was it last night or the night before? He was on with Ian Dale earlier this week. There you go. He was on with Ian Dale earlier this week. And he too is someone who almost defies description.
You know, Heinz baked beans, say the price has shot up at that and people say, oh, this tin has gone up by 50% or whatever. Buy the Tesco value one.
No, but they don't taste the same.
Brendan Clark-Smith there suggesting that if you can't afford baked beans, you're probably unaware of the Tesco value option. I think we should pause for a moment. We're going to talk more about Rishi Sunak than we are about Brendan Clark-Smith or Anne Widdecombe. But I think we should just pause for a moment to reflect upon how horribly detached you have to be, not necessarily from reality. The phrase out of touch is going to pop up a lot this morning, but it's worse than being out of touch. Being out of touch is forgivable. Being out of touch is perhaps about the view from the window that you have. It's the only window you have. You're looking out of the window and perhaps you're not seeing things that other people can see when they look out of their window. But this is worse than that because they're being told what other people can see. They're being told what the world is like for other people. And they're essentially displaying such an absence of care, such an absence of compassion or empathy or whatever you prefer to call it, that it is almost impossible for me to understand why they would want to go into politics in the first place. I mean, good God. We mentioned Christianity a moment ago, that the Bible talks about feeding the hungry. I didn't think I'd live to see an era in the United Kingdom where that became a political goal, feeding the hungry, a political goal that has opponents, like Anne Widdecombe. If you can't afford a cheese sandwich, don't eat a cheese sandwich. If you can't afford baked beans, you're probably somehow unaware of the fact that cheap baked beans exist. I didn't listen to that full exchange. I'm not entirely clear why Ian started talking about the undesirability of own brand baked beans versus Heinz. I mean, it is clearly, if you're down to pennies, if you're doing your shopping with an eye on every single column, not just on the pounds column, but on the pence column as well, then the idea that you would somehow be unaware of value ranges, of cheap options in supermarkets is, I think I'll use the word disgusting with your permission. I genuinely can't believe my ears when I hear things like that. And he's not the first to do it. It happens so often these days. I've forgotten the last one, to actually publicly state that you should try cheaper options if you're struggling to feed your family. Rishi Sunak yesterday on the way to Japan, he claimed that things were getting better. He didn't, as I suggested in my trail a moment ago, he didn't say that you've never had it so good. Even he wouldn't be that silly. But the attempt to portray the economic situation as positive, it really stuck in my craw. claiming that people's household incomes were hugely outperforming expectations despite the cost of living crisis. Listen, I'm out of touch as well. I'm nowhere near as out of touch as Rishi Sunak. Even if I won the lottery, I would still be a long way away from being as out of touch with Rishi Sunak. But I don't feel, I can pay my food bills. So that makes me out of touch. We talk about what the phrase out of touch means. What is wrong with these people? And what to you does the phrase out of touch mean? Because he speaks like a banker. He talks about, for a start, they talk about forecasts being completely rubbish until they like them. So now he's talking about how the forecasts are actually being revised upwards. We've been told that things aren't, the big international economic watchdogs are telling us that things may not be quite as bad next year as they told us they were going to be, no matter that we're still estimated to come 20th in the G20 for economic growth and 7th in the G7. But I don't understand how anybody could sit there with a straight face and tell you, as someone who is struggling with high inflation, someone who is struggling with the cost of food, someone who is struggling with the cost of energy, that there are lots of signs that things are moving in the right direction. There are lots of signs that things are moving in the right direction. Asked to name Brexit benefits, this teetotalist man suggested that beer and sanitary products are cheaper. I don't think that's true. And even if it is true, there's 150 pubs closing in the first 3 months, closing forever in the first 3 months of this year alone. So even if beer was cheaper, where are you going to drink it if your local has just locked its doors for the last time? This phrase out of touch is one of those political phrases that I think gets... overused wouldn't be the right word to deploy at this point, but I think it gets used into oblivion. It gets thrown around so much that we lose sight of what it really means. It's as if you can't see the wood for the trees. He's out of touch. Everybody's out of touch. He's out of touch. He's a champagne socialist. He's a billionaire. He's a businessman. He's out of touch. She's out of touch. She's out of touch. What does it mean when a prime minister looks at an absolutely abysmal economic landscape where people are struggling to stay afloat? It's not the fact that he's so rich. There is. Penny always drops if I hang around for long enough. It's not the fact that he's so rich. You may not agree with me on this, but I don't think that wealth is an obstacle to empathy. I don't think that wealth robs you of the ability to imagine what it's like to be poor. Neither do I go as far as to say that people should pay more tax voluntarily. I want to vote for a party that costs me more money in tax in order to distribute wealth more equally. And as I say, I'm a million miles away from Rishi Sunak's level of wealth. So it's not money that makes you out of touch. What is it?